All right, welcome back to Biblical Theology today. We want to keep on talking about the theme of water showing up throughout the scriptures. And if we continue to look at this theme over and over again, as we've seen already and as we continue to see, it always leads to a good place. If we look at a topic enough, if we go on a long enough rabbit trail, eventually they all lead back to the same place, which is the gospel of Jesus and the person and work of Christ. And so today, a little bit of an interesting topic. We want to look at the rivers of Eden. So this may seem like a little bit of a strange thing to be thinking about, but whenever we start looking at Genesis 2, I think that the text is really telling us to pay attention to these rivers and to start asking questions about them as well. So we read in Genesis 2:10, a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and there it divided and became 4 rivers. And so, just a few verses into the Bible, about 40 verses into the Bible, it starts talking about this garden in the east that is called Eden, and it starts giving us pretty specific location markers for it. There's a river that flows out of Eden to water the garden, and it divides and it becomes 4 rivers. This is something that we should be able to tell where it is. Moses is writing this to the Israelites right after they come out of the Exodus, more than likely. And so he's writing to people and he's putting it in language that he thinks that they can understand. And in a moment, we're going to see that he starts talking about places, and he expects them to know where those places are as well. And so this is a diagram from the Anchor Bible Dictionary. If we came up with our own diagram based on Genesis 2, we would probably come up with the exact same thing. And there at the top in the box, you see that that's supposed to be Eden. You have the one river, and then towards the bottom of the smaller box, it breaks into 4 rivers: the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Gihon, and the Pishon. And again, these are words that show up over and over again in the Bible. The Euphrates and the Tigris and the Gihon and the Pishon will be mentioned in other places in the scriptures. And so Moses isn't just giving us pointless details. He's expecting that his original audience are familiar with these names, and he expects, I think, that readers, even so many thousands of years later, can make some educated guesses about where these rivers were, and eventually make the guess about where the Garden of Eden was located as well. And so this is from the ESV Study Bible, and you can see here that the ESV Study Bible says that there are 2 possible locations for where the Garden of Eden might have been, and both of them are right around what we call the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia, northeast of Canaan. And you can see that both of their guesses have to do with the Tigris and the Euphrates River. The one at the top of the picture is right around the place where the Tigris and the Euphrates are just about meet in the north. And then whenever you look at the second place, the Tigris and the Euphrates are actually coming together. They're close to the Persian Gulf before together running into the Persian Gulf. And so the ESV Study Bible says if we want to make an educated guess about where the Garden of Eden might have been, the Tigris and the Euphrates are both rivers that are mentioned in Genesis 2. Those are both rivers that we have on a map today, so we can try to guess that maybe it was somewhere around those 2 rivers. It is interesting that before the ESV Study Bible was edited, there was actually a 3rd place that the ESV Study Bible said might have been a possible location for Eden. And this one is really interesting. You can see on this picture in the southwest that they actually say it might have been in the land of Canaan. Now, for some reason, the ESV Study Bible decided to crop this one out and not include it in their final edition. But there were some people working on the ESV Study Bible that thought that we could make a fairly educated guess that the Garden of Eden was in the land of Canaan. And we're going to argue in the rest of the video that this is actually the most well-educated guess out of the present options. That it makes the most sense that the Garden of Eden would have been in the land of Canaan, the Promised Land. So why are we making that guess? Well, we're making that guess partially because the term Gihon is one of the 4 rivers. That only shows up in 2 places in the Old Testament. The first is in Genesis 2:13, where it's naming off the rivers, it mentions the Gihon. And then 1 Kings 1:33 also mentions the Gihon. Solomon is going to be king in Jerusalem, and in 1 Kings 1:33 it says, "And the king said to them, Take with you the servants of your Lord, and have Solomon my son ride on my own mule, and bring him down to the Gihon." And so we know that the Gihon is in and around Canaan. It's somewhere actually pretty close to Jerusalem. This is a place that the Israelites still knew about. It was a river that they were near and around. It was close enough to Jerusalem that Solomon was going there to be anointed the king of Israel. And so this, the existence of this river in the Promised Land helps us make the educated guess that perhaps the Garden of Eden was in the Promised Land originally in Genesis 1 and 2. But as we keep on reading through the Bible, we start seeing that there is this idea that there needs to be a river in Jerusalem. And if you look on a map, and if you read the Old Testament, there is no river in Jerusalem. And so it's very odd whenever you come to something like Psalm 46, 4 and 5, that we read this. There's no river in Jerusalem, yet Psalm 46 says, "There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God." Okay, what is the city of God? And our first thought would be Jerusalem, and maybe we think, well, there isn't a river in Jerusalem, so this can't be referring to Jerusalem. But if we keep reading, we see that it has to be Jerusalem. "There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High." Where does God dwell? In the temple. Where is the temple? In Jerusalem. "God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns." And so we don't have a river in Jerusalem, but Psalm 46 is saying there should be a river there. And there should be a river that has more than one stream there. That should be in Jerusalem. If Jerusalem is going to be made glad, what does she need? She needs this river. And as we keep on reading in the Old Testament, we see that this strange river that doesn't actually exist in Jerusalem keeps coming up over and over again. It comes up in Psalm 46, but then we read in Zechariah 14:8, talking about the coming of Christ. "On that day, living waters shall flow out from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea and half of them to the western sea." And so here we have this idea of one river in Jerusalem, and then it splits into two rivers, much the same as how the one river in Eden then split into four different rivers. And so Zechariah is playing with this idea. There should be a river in Jerusalem, and this river should even split. It should have streams, not just a stream. And then we keep going. We come to Joel 3:18. "In that day the mountains shall drip sweet wine, the hills shall flow with milk, and all the stream beds of Judah shall flow with water, and a fountain," and pay really close attention to this, "and a fountain shall come forth from the house of the Lord, and it shall flow all the way out of Canaan into the wilderness to the valley of Shittim." It's hundreds of miles away. And so here Joel says there isn't a river in Jerusalem, but there should be. And more than that, where should that river come from? It should come from the temple itself. And so this is starting to be something really, really strange. Psalm 46, there's no temple in Jerusalem, but for Jerusalem to be made glad, there has to be one, and there has to be one that has streams. And then we go to Zechariah 14. There should be a river in Jerusalem that splits. Then we come to Joel. There should be a river in Jerusalem that begins in the temple. And so maybe we're unsurprised whenever we come to Ezekiel. And Ezekiel, it has this magnificent vision of this new temple. And he says that his guide brought him back to the door of the temple, and behold, water was issuing from below the threshold of the temple toward the east, which would be toward the wilderness, toward Abel Shittim. That there's water flowing out of the temple, and it's going east. The water was flowing down from below the south end of the threshold of the temple, south of the altar. Then he brought me out by way of the north gate and led me around on the outside to the outer gates that faces towards the east, and behold, the water was trickling out on the south side. And so there's not a river in Jerusalem. There hasn't been a river in Jerusalem. When the Bible was written, there wasn't a river in Jerusalem. That's why Solomon is having to go to the Gihon, not to just whatever river is in Jerusalem. There's not one there. The Bible keeps on saying that there should be, and there needs to be, and it needs to be one that comes out of the temple and then splits into other rivers. And so we start getting this idea that Jerusalem really needs this river that looks exactly like the river that was in the Garden of Eden. And so this is very odd. And then finally we come to the end of the story. We've been looking for this river to show up in Jerusalem. We've been looking for it, and now it does. Revelation 22 says, "Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. Also on either side of the river, the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month." So pause right there. A place called the New Jerusalem that has this mighty river coming from the throne of God. And what else is there? Is this giant tree of life. And so you see from this that the Bible is really trying to tell us that there is something Edenish about Jerusalem. And finally we get to the end of the story, and the place that is this new and improved version of Eden is called the New Jerusalem. So why is there this connection between Eden and Jerusalem? And I would just go out on a limb and say that Eden was in Jerusalem. And this starts making a lot of sense all of a sudden, okay? So Adam and Eve are in Eden, they sin, and where do they have to go? They're exiled to the east. The land pushes them out, they can't stay there anymore, and they have to go east. Okay? If we interpret this as Jerusalem, then we see that the exact same story happens in the exile. They're in the promised land, they sin just like Adam and Eve did, and they're exiled east. Where do they go? Babylon. All right? If the Garden of Eden was in one of the places that the ESV Study Bible says it is, then that would have Adam and Eve in Babylon getting pushed further east. That really just doesn't make any sense. But if it's starting in Jerusalem, then we're seeing that the same story is being repeated whenever Israel sins later in the Old Testament and they're pushed east. And then where this really climaxes and becomes really, really beautiful is if Adam committed the first sin and the first rebellion against God by coming to this beautiful tree and saying, "Not God's will, but mine be done," then we also have Jesus coming to a dead and ugly tree so many years later in Jerusalem and going up on the cross willingly saying, "Not my will, but God's be done." And so if Jerusalem is the site of the Garden of Eden, then the place where the first Adam sinned and the last Adam obeyed is the same place. And so this really helps us tie all of these loose ends together, and we start to see that God is this great storyteller. And he put this hint here. There should be a river in Jerusalem, and things maybe look a little bit different on our map than they used to. Maybe sin affected the world in some ways. Some people speculate maybe the flood did something. I don't know about all of that. What I do feel very convinced by, though, is that I think whenever the Israelites read this story, and then they read about how there should be a river in Jerusalem, and they knew that there wasn't one, I think they were able to make the connection between Eden and Jerusalem. And whenever the prophet Jeremiah is sitting in a cistern, knowing that his nation has sinned and is being defeated by the Babylonians, and he's seeing his friends being carried into exile, I think he's realizing that this is just the Adam and Eve story happening all over again. And I think that whenever the first disciples who walked with Jesus had their minds opened to understand the scripture in the last chapter of Luke, I think that they understood the connection between the first Adam and the last Adam, and how the first Adam did everything wrong and disobeyed, and the last Adam comes to the same place and does everything correct. And the first Adam spiritually murders the entire world, makes us all dead in our sin. But the last Adam gives life to all those who will believe on him by faith. And so I just don't think the details really make sense if Eden was located anywhere else. But if we say Eden was located in Jerusalem, we're making a little bit of guesswork. I'll admit that. We're doing a little bit of guesswork, but we're also giving God the benefit of the doubt. That these verses that appear 40 verses into the Bible are really meaningful, and they're trying to help us see the beauty of this big, grand, redemptive narrative that centers on the coming and person and work of Jesus. And so maybe you need a little bit more convincing, and I would just challenge you to continue to read in the scriptures, continue to see how all of these small rabbit trails and all of these seemingly insignificant details ultimately work together to tell one big story of what God has done for the creation. And be willing to give God the benefit of the doubt that maybe these details really are trying to convey a very, very powerful truth. And so thank you for joining us again. We look forward to unpacking more biblical theology content with you all in the future, and we hope that you have enjoyed this video. Thanks for tuning in.